Hi everyone, welcome back to Nick's Diecast. In today's video, I'll be showing you and reviewing this 1/18 scale Aston Martin Valkyrie made by Maisto, or Maisto depending on how you like to pronounce their name. I got this model from Sam's Club for $16.98 in total, which I thought was a fantastic deal. And that's kind of a typical price that you can buy these 1/18 scale models by Maisto with at various wholesale clubs such as Sam's Club, Costco, as well as BJ's wholesale clubs, at least here in the United States. And you can find this particular model elsewhere online for usually between $30 and $45, depending on which site you are looking to purchase it from. This is a newly released model from Maisto, in addition to this really awesome looking dark metallic green with the black interior and the black wheels. You can also get it in a silver with black interior and black wheels. And I assume that more color options for this model will be released as time goes on. But this is actually the first Aston Martin model that Maisto has released a model of in their 1/18 scale line since the early 2000s. The last 1/18 scale Aston Martin model that Maisto released was the DB7 Vantage model in their 1/18 scale line around 2000, and I believe they discontinued that model around 2004 or so from their 1/18 scale line. And I do have an unboxing and a review of that particular model too. So that's pretty significant. And this car is a significant car for the Aston Martin brand as well. The Valkyrie was built between 2021 and 2024 in 275 units, and they were split between the coupe version that you see here. There was also a Spider or a Roadster and a racing version. The Aston Martin Valkyrie had a naturally aspirated 6.5 liter V12 and had a price tag of between $3 million and I think up to $5 million, which depended on, I guess, the various specs that you chose if you happened to be one of the lucky few who was able to have one of these cars built and then purchase one. So it is a very impressive car. This is basically a race car for the road. Just when you look at this, it looks like a race car for the most part, especially from the side like this and everything. It's just a really amazing looking hypercar. And I'm really glad that Maisto made a replica of it for an affordable price. And when you compare the details and the overall quality of this model to Maisto's other more recent model releases, as well as the other budget grade models in 1/18 scale that you can purchase today, this model holds up well. Although I think there are some aspects that can be improved upon. And I will tell you about those aspects as I review the model here. And in real life, of the 275 Aston Martin Valkyries that were built, 150 of them were the coupe version. I forgot to mention that. But now we'll move on to the model and we'll take a closer look at all the details and the build quality of this particular model. We'll start by taking a look up here at the front of the model. Maisto, I think, really did a great job capturing the overall look and shape of this particular hypercar. This hypercar, as you can see, is quite the intimidating presence and has just unique geometry going on too, for sure. In terms of just the overall shape of the car, the various intakes going on and everything, and just all of the different, I guess, aspects of it that make it look like a race car. And the whole model itself is very lightweight, and that is accurate because the real life vehicle is very lightweight as well. The Aston Martin brand, I think, really put a lot of effort into the weight saving measures that they put into this car to make it a very capable hypercar. And I do like how, in spite of being a die-cast model, it is a quite lightweight model too. So that's interesting that Maisto did that. I don't know if they were purposely doing that because the real life vehicle that they were basing the model on is lightweight, or if it just happened to work out that way. But I think the die-cast to plastic ratio on the model is fine. There are a few things that I think probably could have been and should have been made out of die-cast, and I'll talk about that more as well. But in terms of the overall details and everything, we'll take a look up here at the front. Maisto, I think, did a good job of capturing the overall look and shape of the headlights. The headlights do fit nice and flush with the metal portions of the car. And there is some nice detailing in terms of how they mold in the actual light bulbs in there and everything too. No pegs to be seen that hold the lenses in place, which is nice to see. There's kind of a really tiny one up on the top portion, but from a distance you really cannot see that. In the front here, you have the Aston Martin badge in the center here, which is nicely embossed on there. And you can actually make out Aston Martin on there too. And then you also have the Valkyrie license plate. And then you have this lower portion of the car, which is cast in plastic, but is the accurate shape to what you would see on the real Valkyrie. So Maisto, I think, did some good attention to detail in the front of the model here, which is great to see. The paint quality on the model, I would say, is quite good. One thing I noticed is that for, at least at Sam's Club, a lot of the Valkyries that they had there had various like rubbing and scuffs on the paintwork, namely on the wheel wells, but I was able to kind of use a soft cloth and get pretty much all traces of those marks off. There was kind of a tiny bit like left over that I couldn't get off, but I don't even know if you can really see it here on the camera. But aside from that, that might have just been a factory defect for that batch of Aston Martin Valkyrie models, but just keep an eye out for that. And if you do happen to have those scuffs, they can very simply be removed by just using a soft cloth and maybe a little bit of water, depending on how, I guess, much of a mark there is. But aside from that, the metallic green paint really does look fantastic on the model. And the silver version, I think, looks really cool too. I'm not really sure if the silver is also a metallic finish or if you only get the metallic finish on the green, but I really do prefer the dark green color on the model, so I decided to go with that. And I'm certainly glad that I did, because the Valkyrie just looks awesome in this dark green for sure. Taking a look up here, you do have this one single massive wiper for the entire windshield. It almost looks like you can actually move this wiper back and forth. You can't, and even if you could, I wouldn't recommend it, because then you might end up scratching the windshield. But they did a good job, I think, with detailing the single wiper blade, which is cool to see. Taking a look at the wheels, I think Maisto did a nice job with these two. You do have the Aston Martin badges in the center of each of the wheels. It's very hard to see because the badge is actually quite small. But Maisto does detail the brake discs and calipers pretty well on this model, I would say. Of course, the brake discs do not move through the calipers like they should if this were the real vehicle, but at least Maisto does detail them quite well. And with the model, you also get full steering, which on my model, at least, you cannot turn the wheels all the way. You can turn them this way all the way, but not so much that way. I don't know if it's just because the wheel wells are so small and the size of the wheels are kind of almost filling in the wheel well, or if that's just maybe a factory defect for my model. So there is steering, but you don't really get that much of it, I guess, but that's not really a big deal. You do, however, get full suspension on the model, which is always nice to say. And because the car is so low to the ground, you don't really have that much suspension on it either. But at least Maisto did include that, as they do on pretty much all of their 1/18 scale models. So very cool that they're doing that. On the side profile, you do have all the various intakes and lines and just the body work going on that you would, of course, see on the real vehicle. And again, for a cheaper model, I think Maisto really did nail the overall look and shape of the Valkyrie. I don't think this is a very easy car to model just based off all the different shapes that are going on. But Maisto, I think, once again, did a really good job in that sense. And again, that paint finish just sparkles on here, which is really cool. Another cool thing is that you do have full side windows on these Gullwing doors, which I will show you in the later portion of the video. So I do like how Maisto put those in. Taking a look at the rear portion of the car, I think Maisto did a good job with the details back here too. You can see that for the rear wing, you do have a small chip that is very noticeable on my model. I'm sure that's just a factory defect and you can simply just touch it up with a black Sharpie. That being said, this portion of the car is actually made out of metal and is a part of the metal body, which is cool to say. I assume that they just painted this whole portion the same metallic green and they just painted over it with this kind of matte black paint. So you can easily just touch that up with a black Sharpie if you happen to have the same defect that I have. The taillights are nicely detailed. They have a very interesting shape going on. Kind of all these like different individual, almost like glass pieces going on. And that is true to what you would see on the real life of Valkyrie's taillights. They're very interesting in terms of how they look and everything. But they're quite small and there are no pegs to be seen, which is nice to say. You do have these very small kind of red painted indicator lights above those. They are just kind of painted on the body, but they're so tiny that it would be really almost, I think, impossible to make a separately cast piece of plastic for those. So Maisto, I think, did a great job with those aspects of the model too. And it's the overall look and shape of the rear portion of this car is quite outrageous, similar to the front and just the whole thing basically. And then in the center back here, you can see the Valkyrie license plate, which is underneath the rear exhaust pipes, which Maisto, I think, could have done a better job of capturing the overall shape of. The shape of the real car's exhaust pipes are a bit different from what Maisto has on here. The center is kind of more indented, I guess we'll say. It doesn't seem like it's just one single pipe like you see on the Maisto model. It is actually two pipes on the real vehicle, but on here it seems like it's just one single exhaust based off the shape that Maisto kind of molded back here. But not really a big deal because the spoiler kind of hides it, especially when you look at it from like this angle. And then down here, if this were the real car, this is actually where you would plug it in to charge, because this is actually a plug-in hybrid hypercar. I forgot to mention that when I was talking about the real vehicle, but Maisto, I think, did capture the overall look and shape of this part of the car quite well here. So I really do like to see that. Now, in terms of the opening features of the model, you do have the opening front trunk, or frunk as some like to call it, which just opens up like so. Not really a whole lot to see in here. It is very tiny. I think on the real life vehicle, all you can fit in there is like various tire patching and tire repair materials. This should be a little bit deeper here, this very tiny compartment, but I don't think many people are going to be opening up the front trunk on this model to like put up on their shelf or whatever. But I am glad that Maisto did make this into an opening feature. And you also have this kind of carbon fiber texture going on with the plastic here, which is a cool touch. We'll close that up. In addition to the opening front trunk, you also have the opening rear engine cover. And Maisto actually does give you this opening tool for the model. You just kind of have to push it underneath like that, and then lift up the cover like so. And even with that, the cover is kind of hard to get opened up. And it almost feels like you're going to break it when you're actually not going to break it. This is actually made out of just plastic, and kind of a thin plastic at that, for the rear engine cover. So I wasn't really too pleased to see that. And again, this is kind of hard to like, yeah, like it just falls down like that. I don't know if that's just a factory defect for my model or what, but all these models are going to kind of come with this flimsy rear cover. And even the hinges are made out of plastic, as you can kind of see right there, just a slight bit. So just be very careful when you're opening and closing this portion of the car, because eventually it may bend and it might even break if you're too hard on it. So I'm going to probably open and close this as infrequently as I can, just for that reason. I kind of wish that Maisto made this as kind of a true like die-cast piece as opposed to the plastic. I guess they were trying to go for like a more realistic look to the model and have it be like super lightweight, but I don't think having even like a thin metal rear cover would have been that big of a deal in terms of the weight of the model. And again, I don't even know if Maisto was even caring too much about making this a very lightweight model to line up with the actual car. But just something to keep in mind and be very careful with is when you're raising and lowering this rear cover. But that being said, I think the engine detail in here is pretty good for a Maisto model. You can see that there's several different paint colors and plastic textures going on in here. This is just one single piece of plastic, but at least Maisto does put in some detail in there, which is always good to say. You do have the Aston Martin inscription in very small silver print in the center portion here. And then you have this silver component up here, which I believe is actually silver on the real vehicle, which is kind of cool to see that Maisto did that in here too. But aside from that, there isn't really a whole lot of detail. You do have some various molded in like fluid caps and reservoirs and different pipes and hoses and whatnot. And from a distance, it actually does look good when you have it up on the shelf like this with the cover raised up. So I think for a budget grade model, the engine detail back here is good. I think a few like minor tweaks here and there with some maybe additional paint detail would have been welcome, but I think for what this model is, and that's a $30 to $45 model, the engine detail is really well done, I think. And another problem with the rear cover is that it's hard to close too. Like look at that. You try to close it and it just seems like it's going to break right off. And then when you finally do get it to go back in place, it makes a super loud clicking sound. Again, almost as if you're breaking it when you're actually not. I wish I had captured that click on camera, but it didn't sound good. And that will happen, it seems like, whenever you close this up. So I don't know if that's just a factory defect for my model, although I think they kind of have to make it that way. So it actually does stay up, or else it would just fall down the second you raise it up. I think some better construction could be used back here in terms of how the rear engine cover is constructed, perhaps maybe making it out of a thicker plastic or out of a thin die cast. But even though this is kind of a flimsy piece that seems like it's going to break, at least you have the opening feature to begin with. But just be very careful. I would not open or close this up too frequently just for that reason. But the last cool opening feature on this model is, of course, the Gullwing doors, which just raise up like so. At least for the doors, when you do raise and lower them, they do feel like they're nice and secure on the model. That being said, I wouldn't raise or lower these too frequently because eventually their strength may weaken and they might not stay up by themselves like this. But that being said, at least for right now, when you have these Gullwing doors up like this really does create quite the intimidating presence on the shelf. I mean, wow. I think any car with Gullwing doors looks really cool, but the Valkyrie especially with these Gullwing doors raised up, just awesome. In terms of the interior detailing of the model, it is going to be kind of hard to see in here, but you can see at least right here that Maisto did do a good job of capturing the look and shape of the seats in here. You do have the Aston Martin badges molded into the headrests, and this seat is a bit on the loose side, but that's probably just a factory defect for my model. I might just go in there and try to push it back in place. I do have the racing harnesses going on in here, along with the Aston Martin badges molded into the headrest, which look quite well done. And I also like how Maisto includes several different textures of plastic in here. You have kind of an interesting texture going on for the racing harnesses, then you have kind of a more smooth leather-like pattern going on for the seats, and then you have kind of a rougher carbon fiber texture going on behind the seats. Maisto does a good job of detailing the steering wheel as well, with all the different buttons, as well as the center screen, which is where you have your speedometer and everything. But all the detail that you see on the real steering wheel is present here on this model. And then in addition to that, you also have 3 different screens going on here on the dashboard. That's because instead of having traditional side mirrors, this car has cameras, which then project what you would be seeing out of side mirrors onto 2 different screens mounted on the dashboard. So you have one screen mounted up here behind the steering wheel for the driver's side, and then you have a second screen mounted on the passenger's side, back there. And then you have the main center screen on the dashboard as well. And this is true to what you would see on the real-life vehicle. And Maisto actually does go to the trouble of having all 3 of these screens turned on, I guess we'll say, even though they're not actually functioning screens. They have stickers that basically have the Aston Martin logo on them, which I guess is what you would see on all 3 screens when you initially start up the vehicle. There is some good detail, I think, going on with the interior. It's just really hard to see because of the way that the interior is shaped and with these Gullwing doors and everything, and because the interior is all black. So it is kind of hard to see the individual kind of finer details going on in here. But I think for a budget grade model, the interior is quite well done. As far as the undercarriage detail goes on the model, you really don't see anything down here. It's just all carbon fiber texture, which is what I think you would see on the real vehicle. So not really a whole lot to talk about down there. This, I think, really is a good budget grade replica of the Aston Martin Valkyrie in 1/18 scale. And it's definitely nice to have a fully opening die-cast replica in 1/18 scale of this hypercar as well. Because the only other 1/18 scale model that you can find currently of the Valkyrie, I believe, are various resin versions that are not fully opening die-cast and cost quite a bit of money. So in the end, I think for a die-cast model that you can get for below $45, this really is a solid replica of the Aston Martin Valkyrie for sure. And yes, certain aspects can be improved upon on the model, like the fact that the rear cover is made out of that thinner plastic and just a few minor, just fine detail touches on the engine as well as the interior too. But those things aside, this once again I think is a great model for the money. And I think as long as you're paying under $50 for this replica, you're getting a good deal and you're getting a solid model to add to your collection. whether you collect models of hypercars or models of Aston Martins in general. So yeah, feel free to comment down below with your thoughts on this model or on the video, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.